People in Savannah, America still talk about the night a billionaire walked out of a small diner without leaving a tip, and the waitress found a check for $3 billion under his plate. Her name was Lila Monroe, and her life had been tight and hard for a long time. She lived with her little daughter in a narrow blue house near the edge of town, where the porch light flickered and the front step dipped in the middle. The house was not fancy, but it was all she had, and even that felt like it could slip away if one bill came at the wrong time. On most mornings, she opened her kitchen drawer and counted the same small stack of dollars again and again, as if the numbers might change if she stared long enough. She could make a full day of work disappear into rent, school lunch, and gas, and still go to sleep with worry sitting heavy on her chest. The diner where she worked was called Harbor Spoon, a low building with warm windows and a sign that buzzed when it rained. Inside, the booths were cracked, the coffee was strong, and the air always smelled like fried food and sweet pie. On busy nights, the place sounded like a full room of tapping fingers and clinking plates. Lila knew the sound of every regular's laugh, and she could tell who needed extra napkins just by the way they sat down. Her manager Dean Kessler acted like kindness cost money. He watched the floor like a hawk and complained about everything, from the speed of the cooks to the way Lila tied her apron. "Smile bigger," he told her. People tip for smiles. Lila would nod and do it, even when her feet burned and her back ached. That particular night started like any other. The sky was dark, and the street outside shined with old rain. A table of college kids argued over pancakes, and an older couple shared a bowl of soup, eating slow like they had nowhere else to be. Lila kept moving, carrying trays, refilling cups, and saying, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, ma'am," until the words felt like part of her breathing. She was already tired, but she was also counting on tips. She needed every dollar. A late fee was waiting for her at home like a bad surprise, and her daughter's shoes were getting tight at the toes. Then the front door opened, and the room changed in a way people did not notice right away, but they felt it. The man who walked in looked calm and neat, like he belonged in a quiet office, not in a diner with sticky tables. He wore a simple dark coat that fit him well, and his hair was gray at the sides, brushed back without effort. He did not have a crowd with him. No lab friends, no guards. Just one person, moving in with the steady steps of someone who expected doors to open. A woman at the counter whispered his name to the cook, and the cook's eyebrows rose. The man was Victor Halston, a businessman people saw on news screens, the kind who bought companies the way others bought groceries. Folks said he had property in Dallas and Denver, and offices that reached all the way across Europe, but that night he walked in alone. Dean Kessler hurried over with a new kind of smile, the one he saved for rich customers. "Good evening, sir," he said, too sweet. "Anywhere you like." Victor did not act impressed. He chose a corner booth near the window, and sat down with a quiet sigh, like the seat itself was heavier than he expected. Lila was sent to serve him, because Dean always picked his best worker for the tables he cared about most. Lila wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed a notepad, and went over with her polite voice ready. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lila. Can I start you with coffee or water?" Victor looked up, and his eyes were clear and still, like he was taking his time to see what was in front of him. He ordered plain food, nothing special. Coffee, black. A plate with eggs and toast. No fancy side dishes. No long talk. Lila wrote it down and asked if he wanted anything else. For a moment, he didn't answer. Instead, he asked a question that didn't fit the usual diner talk. "How long have you worked here?" He said. Lila blinked, surprised, then answered, "Almost 4 years." Victor nodded as if he had guessed. He watched her face the way a person might watch a clock, like he was measuring something. Then he asked another question, softer than the first. "Do you ever feel like life ignores people who try to do the right thing?" It wasn't rude. It wasn't mocking. It was a calm question, but it landed heavy. Lila had learned not to share too much at work, because people used it against you, or they pitied you, and both felt bad. Still, something about his voice made her answer honestly. She let out a small breath and said, "Life doesn't ignore them. It just keeps going. Sometimes it steps on you while it moves." Victor didn't smile, but his eyes changed, like he understood the shape of that sentence. Lila felt a strange pinch in her throat, and she looked away so she wouldn't show it. She told him she'd be right back with his coffee. As she walked off, she heard Dean hiss, "Don't talk his ear off," like Lila had done something wrong by being human. When she brought Victor his food, he thanked her once and went quiet. He ate slowly, but not like he enjoyed it. More like he was doing a task. He didn't check his phone much. He didn't wave at anyone. He didn't look around the diner like he wanted attention. Every now and then, he glanced out the window at the wet street and his face tightened, then relaxed again. Lila refilled his cup once, asked if everything was okay, and he nodded without complaint. If anyone else had acted that distant, she would have thought they were annoyed. With Victor, it felt different. It felt like his mind was somewhere else and his body had only stopped here because he had chosen it on purpose. Near the end of his meal, Lila walked past the booth and saw him set something down on the table, near the edge, then slide it under his plate with careful fingers. It was quick and small, and if she hadn't been looking at the right second, she would have missed it. Lila paused, confused, but she didn't say anything. Customers sometimes hid cash under plates, so it wouldn't blow away if the door opened. She told herself it was probably that. Still, a strange cold feeling crawled up her arms. Victor stood a minute later, placed his napkin on the table neatly, and stepped into the aisle. Lila hurried over with the check folder, but he lifted one hand to stop her. "No need," he said, calm as ever. "It's handled." Then he gave her a short nod, more serious than kind, and walked out the door. Lila followed him with her eyes. The bell above the door rang once, then the sound was swallowed by the noise of the diner. She waited for a tip to appear on the table, or for him to turn back. But he didn't. He crossed the sidewalk and vanished into the dark like he had never been there at all. Lila's face grew hot with anger. A billionaire, in a small diner, leaving nothing? It felt like a joke played on her, and she was the only one not laughing. Dean would be furious if there was no tip, and Lila couldn't afford a night like that. She marched to the booth, grabbed the plate to clear it, and muttered under her breath, Of course it's like this." The plate lifted, and something pale and sharp-edged stayed on the table, as if it had been waiting for air. Lila froze. A check lay there, perfectly flat, like it belonged in a bank, not under a diner plate. She stared at the numbers first, because that's what fear makes people do. $3 billion. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She flipped it over, hands shaking so hard she nearly tore the paper. It had Victor Halston's name. It had a real signature. It had today's date. The amount was so big it didn't fit inside her mind, like trying to imagine the ocean inside a cup. For one wild second, she thought it had to be fake, a cruel trick. Then she saw how clean the ink was, how sure the strokes were, how careful the paper felt. Lila spun toward the door and ran outside, her apron strings bouncing against her legs. The air smelled like wet pavement and car smoke. She looked left, then right, scanning the street, the parked cars, the corners, and the shadowed spaces between lights. She expected to see him standing there, watching, ready to take it back, ready to laugh, ready to say it was a test. But the sidewalk was empty. A bus rolled by. A couple walked past without noticing her. The night kept moving like it always did. Lila clutched the check against her chest and turned in a circle, breath coming fast, eyes wide, heart hammering like it wanted to break free. Victor Halston was gone, and the paper in her hands felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Morning came too fast, like the night had never happened at all. Lila Monroe barely slept, because every time her eyes closed, she saw the check again, those numbers. Too clean to be real, $3 billion. She kept it on the kitchen table in her small blue house in Savannah, America, but she didn't trust the table, the walls, or even her own hands. She slipped the check into a clear folder, then into her purse, then took it out again to make sure it was still there, like it might turn into a dream the moment she stopped looking. She still had to act normal for her daughter, Maddie, who was half asleep in a hoodie, eating cereal too slowly. Lila braided Maddie's hair with fingers that shook, then packed a lunch with what little she had, 2 slices of bread, peanut butter, and an apple that was starting to soften. "Mom, you're quiet," Maddie said, watching her. Lila forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she lied, and kissed the top of Maddie's head like she always did. When Maddie walked to the bus stop with their neighbor, Carmen Sloan, Lila stood at the door and watched until the bus swallowed them up. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding all morning. She didn't tell Carmen what happened. She didn't tell anyone. The check felt dangerous, like holding a flame. If she said it out loud, someone might take it, or laugh at her, or call the police before she even got a chance to prove it was real. So she walked alone toward the downtown bank, her purse pressed tight against her side. Every sound made her jump: the rumble of a truck, the bark of a dog, the sharp ring of a phone from some stranger's pocket. She kept seeing Victor Halston's face in her mind. Calm eyes, quiet voice, the way he had slid something under the plate like it was nothing at all. The bank was the kind of place that smelled like cold air and clean paper. The floor shined as if it had never seen a dirty shoe. Lila felt out of place as soon as she stepped in, like her worn coat and cheap boots were too loud in that polished room. A security guard watched her longer than he watched everyone else. Lila waited in line, trying to keep her face steady, trying to breathe normally. She repeated one sentence in her head again and again. A customer left it. I'm just depositing it. Simple words. Safe words. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the counter and faced a young teller with a neat tie and careful hair. His name tag read Evan Pierce. Hi, Lila said, and her voice almost broke on the second word. I need to deposit a check. Evan smiled the way tellers do, polite and quick, and held out his hand. Lila gave him the check, and the moment he saw the amount, the smile vanished from his face like someone wiped it off. His eyes moved from the numbers to Lila's face, then back to the numbers again. He blinked hard, once, twice, like his eyes were refusing the truth. Ma'am, he said slowly, where did you get this? His voice wasn't rude, but it wasn't friendly anymore either. It was careful, like he was stepping around broken glass. Lila swallowed. A customer left it at the diner, she said. I work at Harbor Spoon. Even saying the diner's name made her feel small. Evan's eyebrows rose slightly and his chair shifted back with a soft scrape. He looked toward the manager's offices behind the glass wall, then down at the check again. One moment, he said and stood up. Lila's heart started pounding harder. People in line behind her tried not to stare, but she felt their eyes anyway. She could hear whispers, thin and sharp. Evan returned with a woman in a dark blazer, her hair pulled back tight, her face set like stone. Her name tag read Janice Rowe. Janice didn't greet Lila. She took the check from Evan and studied it like it was a strange animal. Then she looked at Lila's coat, her purse, her tired hands, and something in her eyes hardened. This amount is not normal, Janice said. This is not something someone leaves by accident. I know, Lila whispered, and her throat burned. But he did. The man who wrote it, he's real. His name is Victor Halston. At the sound of that name, Evan's face tightened, and Janice's mouth pressed into a thin line. She turned away and murmured something to Evan that Lila couldn't hear. Evan nodded and tapped quickly on his keyboard, hands moving too fast. Janice leaned closer to the check, then to a screen behind the counter, then back to Lila again. She didn't look impressed. She looked suspicious. Janice lifted her chin toward the security guard. Two guards walked closer, not rushing, but not casual either. Janice spoke in a low voice that still carried across the quiet room. Ma'am, we're going to need to verify this. For now, you'll stay here while we contact authorities. The word authorities landed like a slap. Lila's stomach dropped so hard she thought she might be sick. No, she said, shaking her head. I didn't steal anything. I didn't do anything wrong. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She thought of Maddie in school, drawing pictures, trusting that her mother would be there at pickup time. She thought of the blue house and the unpaid bills, and how quickly one bad moment could become a disaster. Janice didn't soften at all. Ma'am, people try things, she said, like Lila was already guilty. We have procedures. Lila clutched the edge of the counter just to stay standing. Her mind raced through worst outcomes: handcuffs, jail, Maddie waiting and waiting. The whispers grew louder. A man in a suit pulled out his phone. Someone pointed, quickly, like Layla was a story they could tell later. Then the bank's front doors opened, and the cold, careful quiet got even quieter. Every head turned. A man stepped inside, moving with the steady calm of someone who didn't fear any room. Dark coat, gray hair at the sides, clear eyes. Victor Halston walked in like he owned the air, and Lila's breath caught in her chest because she knew, in that instant, the real storm was only just beginning. Victor Halston entered the bank like he owned the quiet. The front doors closed behind him, and the room seemed to shrink around his calm steps. Lila Monroe stood at the counter with her hands trembling, her eyes still wet, while two guards hovered nearby. The manager, Janice Rowe, held the check like it might burn her fingers. People in line stared openly now, as if Lila had become a headline in the middle of a Tuesday morning in Savannah, America. Victor stopped beside Lila and faced the counter. His voice was steady and clear. That check is real, he said. And the money belongs to her. Process it. The words hit like a bell. Janice's face tightened, and the teller, Evan Pierce, went stiff in his chair, staring at the amount again as if it had changed. Lila felt her knees weaken. For a moment she thought she might faint, because the scene had become too big for her small life. Janice tried to sound in control. "Mr. Halston, with respect, this amount requires verification. We contacted the police because you assumed she lied." Victor cut in, not loud, just sharp. "I wrote it, I signed it, I left it for her." "That is your verification." He turned his head slightly toward Lila, and his expression softened by a thin edge. "No one touches her. No one accuses her." Janice swallowed and glanced at the guards, who shifted back as if his words were a command they already understood. 2 police officers stepped in from the side door. The older one, Officer Marcus Dale, looked from Lila to the check and then to Victor, and his brow lifted. "Sir," he said, careful, "the bank reported possible fraud." Victor met his gaze without flinching. "There is no fraud. I wrote the check." He nodded once toward Lila. "She did nothing wrong." Officer Dale stared at him for a second longer, then exhaled slowly. "You're Victor Halston," he said, half a question. "I am," Victor answered. Lila's fear broke into anger and tears at the same time. She stepped forward, shaking. "Why did you do this?" she cried. "They were about to treat me like a criminal. I didn't ask for this. I'm just a waitress with a daughter and a blue house that can barely hold together." Her voice cracked. "Why leave it under a plate like some cruel trick?" Victor looked at her fully now, and the room felt even quieter. He took a slow breath, like a man choosing each word with care. "Because I'm going to die," he said. The sentence hung in the air like cold fog. Evan's mouth parted. Janice went pale. Even Officer Dale's posture changed, his shoulders lowering slightly, as if the fight had drained out of him. Lila blinked hard as if she had misheard. "What?" she whispered. "I have very little time left," Victor said. "I have money. I have doctors in Boston. I have houses in America and paperwork spread across Europe. None of it can buy me more days." His eyes stayed on Lila's face. "So I started looking for something I can still do that matters." Lila wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. "And you picked me?" she said, almost offended by how impossible it was. "Yes," Victor said simply. "Last night I watched you. You were tired, but you didn't become cruel. You didn't fake kindness, you didn't beg. You worked, you kept moving, and you still treated people with respect." His voice softened, just a little. "Your character is beautiful. I don't see that often. I thought, if I can't carry my money where I'm going, then I'll put it where it can change a life." Lila's chest hurt, as if she'd been running. She thought of Maddie, small hands, small shoes, big hopes. She thought of overdue bills and thin cupboards and the way she had learned to smile through panic. Victor turned back to Janice. "Do your job," he said. "Give her what is hers." Janice's hands shook as she slid the check to Evan. Evan finally started typing, fingers moving fast. Officer Dale stepped back, no longer suspicious, just stunned. And Lila stood there in the bright, cold bank, realizing that the life she knew, small, scraped, and fearful, had just cracked open, and there was no way to fit back inside it again. Lila Monroe stood on the front steps of a small community building in Savannah, America, holding a plain white envelope that said $10,000 on the front in thick ink. A young mother named Tessa Grady stood in front of her with red eyes and a shaking smile, one hand holding a little boy's fingers like she was afraid to let go. Lila pressed the envelope into Tessa's hands and said, "This is rent money, and it's grocery money, and it's the start of you breathing again." Tessa covered her mouth and cried, and the whole room went quiet like it was watching something holy. It took months to reach that moment, even with $3 billion waiting in a bank. Money that big moved slowly, like it had its own rules. After the bank finally accepted the check, Lila sat in a private office with a glass wall and a box of tissues on the table. A lawyer named Caleb Rourke explained papers in easy words, pointing with a pen and never rushing her. A financial worker named Denise Hart talked about safety, taxes, and plans. Lila signed forms until her wrist hurt, and still she felt like she might wake up and be back at Harper Spoon, carrying coffee to strangers. The bank opened special accounts in Lila's name, and people who had never looked at her twice suddenly spoke to her like she was made of gold. That part felt strange and sharp. Lila kept thinking of the moment they had called the police on her. She remembered how small she had felt at the counter, and how fast people were ready to blame her. So she stayed careful. She didn't tell the diner. She didn't post anything. She didn't even tell most of her friends. She went home to her narrow blue house and locked the door, and when she finally sat at her kitchen table, she cried until her face hurt, not only from joy, but from the shock of being seen and not knowing what it would cost. The first thing she changed was not her clothes and not her car. It was the feeling inside the house. She called a contractor named Raymond Sutter, a calm man with big hands who spoke softly. She showed him the ceiling stain in the hall and the window that let rain slip in like a thief. "Fix it all," she said, and her voice shook, because she had never been able to say those words before. Over the next weeks, the roof stopped leaking, the porch steps got level, and the porch light stopped flickering like a tired eyelid. Lila paid every bill that had ever chased her. She cleared the late fees, the old medical balance, and the debt that had made her stomach twist every time the phone rang. She bought Maddie new shoes, then sat on the edge of Maddie's bed and watched her child sleep, trying to understand what safety felt like. Maddie, who had grown used to maybe next week, asked, "Mom, are we okay now?" Lila swallowed hard and said, "Yes, we're okay." For real, that was the first night Lila slept without waking up in fear. But the world didn't stay gentle just because her bank balance changed. News traveled as it always does, through whispers and guesses. Someone at the bank told someone else. Someone saw Lila meeting with lawyers. Soon strangers began appearing at her door with sad stories and bold eyes. A man named Gordon Pike said he was her cousin and needed $5,000. A woman named Marcia Lynn claimed she had been Lila's best friend in school and asked for $20,000. Lila learned a new kind of tired of saying no. Caleb Rourke taught her a simple rule. If you give from fear, you'll never stop paying. So Lila put up a gate, hired a quiet security man named Hugh Maddox, and kept her life small on purpose. Still, she couldn't forget the way Victor Halston had spoken in the bank, like her dignity mattered more than his money. She didn't know how to carry that kind of gift without letting it change her into a cold person. So she asked Denise Hart a question that sounded simple but felt heavy. "How do I help people without drowning?" Denise answered, "By building a system, not a habit." That word system stuck in Lila's mind. She didn't want to toss cash like crumbs. She wanted something that lasted when she was gone, the way Victor had tried to do. Lila bought a modest building near a quiet street, not far from a public school, and painted the front a soft color that made it feel warm even on gray days. She named it the Plate Turn Fund because her life had turned on a plate in a diner, and she didn't want to pretend it happened in a neat office. She put comfortable chairs inside, a small play corner for kids, and a kitchen where coffee was free. She hired a kind receptionist named Renee Calder and a caseworker named Noah Kingston, a man who had once lived in his car and knew what panic sounded like. The fund had rules because Lila wanted it to be fair. It helped single parents with rent, car repairs, school needs, and job training. It didn't ask people to beg. It asked them to plan. When someone came in shaking, Lila would sit with them and speak like a human, not like a rich person. Some days she heard stories that made her chest ache, parents choosing between medicine and food, workers sleeping in break rooms, mothers crying in parking lots. Each time, she remembered her own kitchen drawer with a thin stack of dollars, and she felt the old pain rise like a ghost. A letter arrived one afternoon in a plain envelope, with no return address. Lila opened it at her kitchen table while Maddie did homework beside her. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was clean and calm. Victor Halston wrote that he was glad she had taken the money instead of hiding it out of fear. He wrote that he hoped she would protect her heart because money pulled people like a storm pulls loose leaves. He wrote one line that Lila read twice: "Make a home for others, even if you stay in the same house." At the bottom was a short note from a hospital in Phoenix, America, saying he had passed away quietly. Lila covered her mouth and cried again, but this time it was grief sharp and real. Weeks later, she did something private. Oh, cameras, no big crowd. She drove with Maddie to a small memorial service in a simple room, where a few people spoke in soft voices. A woman named Clarissa Vane, who said she had worked with Victor for years, shook Lila's hand and whispered, "He didn't trust many people. If he chose you, it meant something." Lila didn't answer much, she just listened. She realized Victor had been rich but lonely. He had used his last big act to place meaning somewhere outside himself. Back in Savannah, life settled into a new shape. Maddie laughed more. The blue house smelled like fresh paint instead of damp walls. Lila stopped working as a waitress, but she didn't stop working. Some mornings she walked through the fun building and greeted people by name, as if that mattered more than the numbers in her accounts. And sometimes late at night she stood on her repaired porch and looked at the quiet street, thinking about how fast a life could turn. Lila kept one small thing from her old days. A single wrinkled $1 bill from her last shift at Harbor Spoon. She framed it and hung it near the kitchen door. Not because she missed being poor, and not because she wanted to feel sad. She kept it because she never wanted to forget the truth of it. She had once been invisible in America, and then, for reasons she still couldn't fully explain, someone had seen her clearly and decided she was worth a future.